Greetings. My name is Robert Mejia, and in this presentation, I'll provide an approximate 15-minute overview of the evolution of modern citizen journalism in the United States since the early 2000s. Let's get started. Citizen journalism is known by many names. It's participatory, democratic, civic, and public. It's collaborative, grassroots, and community-driven. Some scholars define citizen journalism as a form of civic participation and social activism, through which everyday people contribute their perspectives, experiences, and opinions of news with and alongside mainstream journalism. Citizen journalism and user-generated content arose due to the democratizing values of participation. It redefined traditional news spaces through connected, interactive news production by those unaffiliated with the traditional news media, many without training as journalists. The technological determinism of Web 2.0 in the early 2000s led to rapid online production of user-generated content, collaboration, and social networking, which allowed widespread interactive citizen participation in journalism for the very first time. Among the major developments of Web 2.0 were increased ownership of PCs with more powerful processors and larger hard drives, AJAX technology, which allowed more dynamic and responsive web interfaces, and broadband internet, in which large files with video and images could be shared more easily. Web 2.0 gave rise to blogs and wikis, video sharing, folksonomy, social media platforms built on the principles of user interaction and content sharing, and more. Shortly before the acceleration of Web 2.0 in the early 2000s, a flashpoint in Seattle, Washington, catalyzed what soon became a global social movement in citizen journalism. It was called the Battle for Seattle. Germinated by the 1990s global justice movement, what was known as the Independent Media Center, or Indie Media movement, rose to prominence, largely in response to its efforts to shut down the 1999 World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference in Seattle, Washington. Indie media mainly focused on protests and social movements. It used crowdsourced journalism, and it combined technology with non-hierarchical organization. Learning from the earlier work of other radical media pioneers, DIY media activists pooled their resources and technical skills to facilitate the publishing of independent, non-corporate news reports from the streets as protests and police violence unfolded. The world stood up and took note. The World Trade Organization was shut down, and the Indie Media Network sprang to life.
When labor and student and environmentalists and human rights activists stand together, we can and did shut down the WTO.
20 years ago this week, tens of thousands of activists gathered in Seattle, Washington to shut down a ministerial meeting of the World Trade Organization. Grassroots organizers successfully blocked world leaders, government trade ministers, and corporate executives from meeting to sign a global trade deal that many call deeply undemocratic and harmful to workers' rights, the environment, and indigenous people globally. On November 30th, 1999, those activists formed a human chain around the Seattle Convention Center and shut down the city's downtown.
Police responded by firing tear gas and rubber bullets into the mostly peaceful crowd. And the protests went on for 5 days, resulted in over 600 arrests and the eventual collapse of the talks, as well as the resignation of Seattle's police chief.
The beautiful thing of this is this really wasn't organized by any leader. It wasn't organized by any group, all right? It was organized by Monsanto. It was organized by Exxon and General Motors and Microsoft and all the other greedy bastards who've spent the last 2 decades trying to make as much money as they can at the expense of everybody here. Don't blame any violence or anything on anybody here. The violence is taking place in these companies that have enacted their violence against these people.
Well, we turn now to look at how the 20th anniversary of protests in Seattle that shut down a meeting of the World Trade Organization also marked the time when the first independent media center came to life. Amidst the clouds of tear gas, hundreds of volunteer reporters documented what unfolded. That week, IndyMedia.org received 1.5 million visitors, more than CNN, and it produced a daily video report and a newspaper. It was the first node in a global citizen journalism movement.
We're going to meet some of the Indie Media activists in a moment, but first this excerpt from Showdown in Seattle. It was produced for Deep Dish TV by the Seattle Indie Media Center and scores of media activists. In the clip, we get a tour of the very first independent media center, beginning with Jeff Pearlstein, one of the founders of Seattle Indie Media.
The main motivation for us starting the Independent Media Center was folks on the ground here in Seattle recognizing the importance of this issue, and also that all these tremendous, brilliant, articulate people were coming from all over the world to speak truth to power here, to confront globalization and its anti-democratic agenda.
One of the critical aspects to this center is that it's been a clearinghouse of information for lots of individuals, not only who live in Seattle, but have been coming in from around the country and around the globe to participate in the events this week. And we are providing a base of operation for journalists and others who are going out into the streets and capturing the content, editing the content, and then distributing it over the internet, over satellite, over faxes, literally around the world.
We have to find our own ways to get the message out. So because the revolution will not be televised by the corporate media, we hope that the information that has been presented to you by the alternative media is one that you will learn.
What's really important to note about the whole center that's taking place is that it's fairly unprecedented. We've got teams that are covering video, we've got teams that are covering print. We have a newspaper actually being published every day out of this center.
The Blind Spot, which is this paper, it's the paper that the Independent Media Center puts out every day during the WTO, and it's basically like a 11 by 17 fold over that's front and back, and which is pretty much all we can afford to do. I'm sure we could fill a lot more.
That's an excerpt from Showdown in Seattle about the first independent media center that opened 20 years ago this week.
With the momentum of success against the WTO, Indie Media established a global network of independent media centers. It argued for democratic media practices. It eventually had 200 chapters around the world at its peak, but it was eventually eclipsed by commercial social media. The traditional news media and professional journalists were not disposed to ceding control of the editorial process to their new, untrained rivals. One of the main obstacles to the development of citizen journalism was that, in general, audiences displayed very little interest in the creation of news content. Those who did show interest in citizen journalism were driven by the ideas they wanted to reach the public, and by dissatisfaction with traditional news media and the ideas that they defended. Many of the new so-called citizen journalists were more interested in creating content related to popular culture and their daily lives than in journalistic content of more general interest. They lacked the professional resources and access to information held by their professional counterparts, and their content was often considered weak because of their general lack of training. Audience participation in news reporting required a great deal of technical and human resources to filter content. Many journalists felt user-generated content needed to be reviewed by professionals in order to avoid bias and manipulation. Participation spaces needed to be redefined, moderation needed to be increased, and new tools needed to be implemented, including machine learning. Many media outlets reduced their participation sections or closed them altogether, which diverted audience participation to social media that became the typical channel for interaction with news media content. Instead of news creation, online audiences began to focus on news commentary. In this new citizen journalism paradigm, the rules of audience participation like identity, relevance, brevity, authority, entertainment, and civility gave way to anonymity, confrontation, and ultra-brevity, which opened the door to uncivil discourse, hate speech, and other kinds of excesses. Citizen journalism wasn't going to replace the media's news work. Instead, it would occupy a secondary role. News companies have seen user-generated content as a way to increase the number of visits to their sites, to capture attention for longer and garner greater loyalty to the publication, and in some cases also reduce production costs. For news companies, profit replaced the imperatives of participation, free speech, and increased democratic freedoms. Despite its shortcomings, citizen journalists have demonstrated initiative in tracking down their own stories, offering first-person testimonies and testimonies based on their own experiences. And they help to enrich the public sphere by offering coverage of alternative issues, events, and points of view. Citizen journalism currently occurs on the periphery of traditional news media. The idea of citizen journalism offering user-generated content through the media outlets themselves now appears to be a thing of the past. Although the possibility of directly creating news in the media has flagged, the capacity to share the news and guide professional journalist routines toward more commercial, profit-oriented perspectives has increased. Citizen journalists are now considered redistributors of information generated by institutional media rather than co-creators of content. As gatewatchers and redistributors of institutional media content, citizen journalists influence the content the media create based on their success in social media. Citizen journalism has made valuable contributions to events of great social impact, showing its ability to offer information in real time, directly from the place where events are happening. For example, citizen journalism was responsible for much of the live coverage of 2004's Indonesian tsunami that killed over 200,000 people. According to one scholar, for this reason, we might consider that audiences performed acts of journalism in a complementary way to the work carried out by the news media. Today, citizen journalists are advocates who influence the hierarchy of news, a role previously held exclusively by professional journalists who decided which news was worth sharing and which was not. Are you a citizen journalist and didn't know it? Do you know someone who is? Do you see a relevance and continuing need for the original form of citizen journalism? What's your prediction for the next evolution in citizen journalism? I'd like to hear from you. I'm Robert Mejia. Thank you for watching.